Here's how these celebrities' kids reacted when they discovered that their parents were famous, and Paul's son takes the cake. Let me tell you, Jack Rudd was one blunt kid. Born in 2006, the oldest Rudd child had no idea that his dad was famous, even though Paul's practically the definition of it. The Ant-Man actor revealed this in a talk show in February 2023, recalling the time when a 4 or 5-year-old Jack went to a theater to catch a kids' movie with his friends. Around that same time, one of Paul's movies was also showing. And naturally, there was a movie poster with his face smack in the middle. Now, imagine a 5-year-old discovering his dad's photo in the theater. What would his obvious conclusion from that be? That his dad is an extremely famous actor who starred in critically acclaimed and popular shows and films. Heck no. Of course, the only possible explanation for Jack was that his dad just worked at the theater. Paul found the whole ordeal really amusing, not to mention super cute as well. And it is. It wasn't actually until much later that he realized that Dad did not in fact work at the theater and that he was actually a world-famous actor. Now you'd think that'd surprise him. Well, according to Paul, his child wasn't fazed at all. None of his children were actually, not even when they found out that Dad was Ant-Man. In an interview with Entertainment Tonight way back in 2015, Paul brought up Jack's response to finding out about his role as Ant-Man. Now, Ant-Man being a superhero and all, you'd think that would excite young boys aged around 9, right? Well, not this one. Paul told his son that he was going to be a superhero, Ant-Man to be specific. And guess what the 9-year-old's response was? He asked, "Who? What?" I think it's safe to say that Jack wasn't impressed at all. And Paul wouldn't have it any other way. To his kids, he'll always be their dad more than a superhero. And that's exactly how it should be. Paul said, "They don't care, nor should they." Kristen Bell's daughters, though, had a different reaction when they found that not just their dad, but their mom was also famous. Kristen and Dan Shepard's daughters, Lincoln and Delta, have handled their parents' fame in the best way possible, through utter shock and disbelief. Some context here. For those of you who don't know, Dan has a podcast called Armchair Expert that's gotten a lot of traction. And Shepard once mentioned that the traction was probably because of his popularity in front of one of his daughters, who could not believe it. Not the traction part, but the famous part. One of them was baffled and asked, "You're famous!" And you know what her next question was? The little girl wanted to know if their mom knew he was famous. Dan was so amused at the whole thing. He told his kid that Mom, being the voice of Anna in Frozen, among so many other things, was much more famous than himself. And the young child displayed the same amount of surprise. Now, it's not that the kids didn't know that Mom and Dad were actors or anything. They know how they made their money. They just didn't know that fame goes hand in hand with a successful career on the big screen. Having the word famous attached to their parents became a whole other thing. Unlike Jack Rudd, who couldn't care less. Kristen and Dan's kids thought their parents were way more famous than they really were, like Taylor Swift level or something, and everyone in their kindergarten class just had to be told about it, which is pretty interesting, because in Hilary Duff's case, it was the other way around. Hilary's son, Luca Comrie, was pretty oblivious to his mom's massive celebrity status. Even the dozen paparazzi cameras that always surround her couldn't help the little boy figure it out. He saw his mom on the cover of several magazines in a grocery store. And instead of thinking that his mom worked at the grocery store, "Sorry, Jack, I had to." Luca thought that it was just a normal mom thing to be on the cover of these glitzy, glossy magazines. Today it was his mom. Tomorrow it's gonna be his friend Shane's mom's turn. Hilary suspects that it was someone at school that actually burst her son's bubble. But even then, Luca wasn't too interested in it. And it seems like Duff is more than okay with that. In another interview in the same year, Hilary actually expressed her desire for Luca to not follow her career. She doesn't want him to deal with the pressures that come with being so famous, and good on her for that. It's probably good that someone at school told Luca then, because Mom was in no mood to. And it looks like Luca wasn't the only one who found out like this, since Emily Blunt and John Krasinski's daughters went through the same thing. For those of you who might not know, celebrity couple Emily Blunt and John Krasinski shared 2 adorable daughters, Hazel and Violet. In an interview, Emily revealed that she and her husband both went out of their way to avoid using the word famous at home, because they actually wanted their kids to remain oblivious, until one day, their oldest daughter Hazel went up to her mother and asked whether she was famous. Emily was obviously surprised and asked Hazel who told her that. But Hazel, she was no longer interested. She lost interest right there and then and didn't say anything else, which is honestly hilarious. But not as hilarious as their reactions to learning that Dad, too, is famous. John revealed that his daughters just can't accept that their father is an actor. When the girls discovered that Emily was Mary Poppins in the franchise's 2018 spin-off, they were really impressed and ultimately thought that Mom was the cooler parent. They didn't show the same levels of enthusiasm, though, when they learned that while their mother was donning the big screens in major movies, Dad had only been in the office, which to them quite literally meant Dad going to the office for work. I'll piece it together for you. John talked about how fans on the street approached him by saying that they knew him from The Office, as any fan would. Except in this particular case, given the name of the show, it was just too confusing for his kids, who simply refused to believe that those fans were even fans. They thought that those were just people Dad knew from work, because hey, didn't they say that they knew him from The Office? Hazel and Violet thought that John was always lying to them when he said that he did not, in fact, work with those people. They were convinced that he worked your regular 9-to-5 job in the literal office. And wait, this gets even better. Now, they knew that Mom was Mary Poppins, so naturally they thought that she only married a regular office-working guy like John out of charity. Eventually, though, they obviously found out that the show The Office does exist, but they still didn't believe that their dad was in it. These girls, I tell you, they're hilarious, just like their parents. John revealed that he and Emily let their daughters watch a few episodes of the series after they showed some interest in its existence. Starting with the pilot episode, both Hazel and Violet were surprised. And no, not because of how good their dad was, but rather because of how bad Steve Carell's character was. The older one, Hazel, actually started talking to the screen. When it came to John's charming character, Jim Halpert, young Violet could simply not believe that it was her dad. She knew that the guy looked familiar and kept asking whether it was indeed her father, to which John replied that yeah, it was. But Jim Halpert looked and acted so different that despite John's insistence, Violet refused to acknowledge that it was him. Sorry, Dad, that's not you, nope. Unlike these two, who took a long process to discover their parents' fame and even occupation, Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds' daughters know that their parents are actors. They just didn't know that being an actor also means you've got to be famous. If you ask Blake, her daughters probably don't even know what acting really is. They just know it's a job title, just like any other job title. And Blake wouldn't have it any other way. Like both she and Reynolds tend to star in some pretty dark projects sometimes. Their kids would be terrified if they saw their parents like this. And according to Blake, they won't be terrified for their parents. No, they'd probably be scared of them, which is hilarious. So from Blake and Ryan's daughters thinking acting is a normal profession for all parents, to Paul's son thinking his dad worked at the local movie theater, that was how celebrities' kids reacted to finding out that their parents are famous.